Yeah, there is a video I saw about the other American brother. I think it's Uhuru or Dynasty, or I think it's called Dynasty. The other brother from America who normally comes to Africa. I love his videos and stuff, but there's certain things which a lot of black people globally are not aware. No. What I want to this is the answer I want to say regarding the topic he did. These brothers say why white people. He said why white people love Africans but can't stand African Americans. Look, I'm going to give you the answer. The answer you're going to get it from me is full blown, not only correct, is the best answer you'll ever heard from any black man. Now you have to listen to me very carefully. Now here's the reason. You said why white people love Africans but can't stand black Americans or African Americans. Here's the answer. The answer is not really. White people don't love Africans. What you think is not necessarily that white people love Africans but can't stand African Americans. No, that's not true. White people don't love Africans. No, never did, never will. They don't love Africans. What you are dealing with white people understand that Africans are not aware of global. They're not aware of the global situation, the geo-economics, geopolitical situation, and geographical setup of black populations globally. They understand that black people in Africa do not have the information or the correct information of the status of black people globally. They understand that black people in Africa, majority of them, almost 80% of the African population, of black African populations, are extremely poor. Many black people you see in Africa do not have access to electricity, do not have access to information, do not have access to a lot of things, particularly to the status of black people outside Africa. 90% of Africans are not aware of the black people living outside Africa. A lot of white people are well aware of that. That black people in Africa are not aware of black people living in Australia. They're not when you're saying black Africans, you must understand that an average Joe African who's walking in the street does not have information a black person in America have. If you are a black person who lives in Europe or America or the Western world, you are a black person who is in the position to get the information at any time you like. You've got information tools in your own disposal. You can access everything from America. If you are a black person who lives in the United States or in Europe, you can access a lot of information globally. You can see the status of black people in any country from the information tools. An average black person in Africa is not aware of that. 80% of black people in Africa do not have access to a lot of things a black person in America or Western Europe has. 80% of Africans do not know the status of black people globally. 80% of Africans, 80 to 90% of Africans do not have the information of the status of black people outside. They don't know the existence. They don't know the countries. They don't know the whereabouts. They don't know the status of which, how are they living? What are they? Under which circumstances are these black people live? But an average European person or an average white person in America is well aware of that. You understand? So you've got two different mentalities. The people you see in Africa do not know anything. Do not have the notion that black people you see in Africa, those black people you see in Africa, in the African tribes, who lives in the African rural areas, minding their own business, doing whatever they're doing locally, those type of black people, tribal black people like the Maasai, or black people in Kenya, Nigeria, or black people, the ordinary average Joe Africans do not have access to information of the status of black people globally. But That's not the same case for white people. A white person living in any country, they've got access to information. They've got access to computers, a lot of information media, but that's not the case. Majority of black people, even if you go to Africa, almost 50% of African people, 50% do not have even access to electricity. You see, if you live in a Western country, something happening in America, you live in France, you can know, within a fraction of a minute, you know that. 90% of black people you see even in America do not know the status of black people in Brazil. To have access to know the status of black people in Australia, in Fiji, in Fiji, in those islands in the Pacific, majority of black people in Africa, they have no idea of black people in those countries. So do not have the notion that black people somehow they've got an eye view of the world. An average black African has got an eye view of the world. They don't. You must need, this is the information a lot of black Americans don't know. You don't know that majority, you need to understand that majority of black people in Africa do not have access to information. 90% of Africans do not know, had no idea of the existence of black people outside Africa. 90%, and by 1955 to 1960, nearly 1980, 90% of African black people had no idea of the existence of black people outside Africa. Had no clue. Majority of people you see in Africa are too poor to even access an electricity, a TV or a radio. You understand? So the idea that they know the status, one thing which a lot of black people in America, and guess what? And their Caucasian counterparts, they are well aware. When a Caucasian person is coming to Africa, they've got a lot of information of Africa. They've got a lot of information of where they're going. An average black person in Africa, they don't know anything in America, Detroit. They don't even have a clue of America. You understand? So do not have an assumption that an average African person who have never put foot in America somehow automatically knows what's going on in America. They don't. Black people you see in Africa, they don't. They have no clue of the existence of black people outside Africa. Everything they see, majority of Africans, they begin to see the existence of black people outside America through the TV, especially for black people in America. You understand? They don't know anything about black people in the Caribbean. It's a very recent thing for black people to know. Later on know the status. You know what I'm saying? Later on know the status of how black people function, like in countries like in the Caribbean, in Brazil, where a lot of black people live in some of the worst situation, like black people in Brazil who are almost, wiped out almost every single day there. So do not have this assumption that an average African somehow is an idea. One thing which you need to understand is that Africa is almost 4 times the size of the United States, and with nearly 3,000 tribes and over 3,000 languages spoken in Africa. Many black people in Africa live in small tribal plots in the rural areas all throughout Africa. So the idea of them even knowing what's going on, see, do not think that not only African people, even African leaders themselves. African leaders do not have access. Majority of African leaders, they don't know. They don't know. Don't have an assumption that an African leader somehow is well aware of what's happening to black people in America, in Brazil or wherever. And sadly, a lot of Caucasian people know that. You understand? They're well aware that black people don't know the status of other black people outside Africa, or the status of black people globally. You see what I'm saying? White people in America, they know the status of white people in Australia, in Argentina, Brazil, Chicago, Middle East. They know almost everything from a globe. They're looking at the things from a global. A lot of Africans are not looking, they don't have that eye view. They don't have that view of the globe. You understand? So when they know things, it's pretty much from a local, tribalistic. You understand? That's the only information they have. You understand? And when you're looking at their Caucasian counterparts, that's not the case. Their Caucasian counterparts are well aware of this thing from a global. They have the global view of things. They can know the status of what's going on the other side of the channel. Quick like that. But not for us. Especially not for an average African. You understand? These are some of the things which you need to understand. A person who lives in for example, in Kenya, the so-called Maasai, they live in the rural areas. Most of them have no access to telephones, no access to computers, they live in the rural areas. And then when they're visited by tourists or Europeans coming for tourists, they're looking at someone who's coming to see a lion. Most of them, they think these are foreign people who are coming to see lions and things. They're not aware of the global situation of black people globally. They don't have that eye view. You understand? Majority of Africans, I'm talking 90% of Africans, they're not aware of the global eye view of the status of blacks in the diaspora or black people globally. The status of black people everywhere on earth. The Africans don't have that. You understand what I'm trying to say? They don't have that. Majority of a person like who lives in America, when you're looking at Africa, you have got an eye view of looking at what is happening in Africa. The real African person is like a person, an animal in the box. An animal in the box only knows the four corners of the box, but a person outside the box has got an eye view of pretty much the entire neighborhood, the entire city. People who are inside the box, their view world is very limited. Majority of Africa, especially in Africa, people don't have access to it. Many people you see in Africa, they're tribal people who know only their local land, their communities, their villages, and that's the information they have. That's it. They don't know the status of a black person who lives in Nigeria. There's no access to a black person who lives in Angola. The ordinary people. You understand? Majority of them are poor to access these tools. They later on a person who lives outside America. You understand? So this knowledge, a lot of white people have got that knowledge. They know. This is why during slavery, when Europeans came to Africa during slavery in the 1300s, when they came to Africa, slavery, they made it clear that slavery must be concentrated on the one region where it was mistakenly started, in West Africa, in countries like Ghana and Nigeria, especially in West Africa. Notice when slavery started, it started in West Africa and ended in West Africa. They didn't spread it out. Why didn't they spread slavery like in South Africa, in countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, countries which are closer to Europe? Why didn't slavery spread out there? See, when slavery started, it started and ended without almost 90% of African people you see today have no idea of slavery. 90% of Africans have no idea. Why? Because slavery was concentrated in the same place, and they made it sure that the rest of the African people had no idea. And a lot of African people were divided into small tribal, made not to connect to each other. And later on, countries were divided, and people were actually not to talk to other tribes. You see, all these measures were put for 500 years. You understand? So you have got to look at America. America has got 50 states. Imagine America having 50 states. America's got over 50 states. Imagine if America had over 50 states and 50 presidents. A president of New York, a president of Iowa, a president of Chicago, a president of so all these countries with the 50 presidents in America, it will be tough for a black person who lives in New Orleans or Chicago to travel to California. If California had a new president, all American countries had 50 states, every person would be stuck in their own country. You wouldn't be flying up and down to America. That's like Africa. That is how Africa is. So a country where like Nigeria has no clue of what happens in South Africa or Kenya. People, ordinary people, they don't have that information. If they don't have access to technology, 90% of them have no clue. While it's in America, if you are in Chicago, you can know anything which happened in New York. If you're in New York, you can know anything which happened in California, because it's one country, very connected. Africa is not like that. Africa, even within one country, you would see that the people in the city, they're not even connected to the ones in the rural areas. The people living in the rural areas have no access to information. Those living in the cities are the only ones with access of information of what happens in the city. Sadly, a lot of Europeans have got all that knowledge. You understand? They access that knowledge even from Europe. They're well aware I'm going to Kenya in this village, but a black person in Kenya has no idea of Europe or America. So don't have this assumption. So your question, you said, well, why are Africans, why Europeans love Africans and don't love African Americans? That's not correct. The question I'm saying to you, they understand that they understand that Africans are not aware, because Africans are not aware of the global status of black people globally. Majority of black people. This is why you see black people you see today, they still pray to the same Jesus which they were programmed to deal with 500 years ago during slavery. They're still praying to the same Jesus. No clue. They're not aware of globally of the status of black people. Majority of black people, not only black, ordinary black people, including black leaders, majority of them, they are not access. They don't access the status of what is going on to black people globally. They don't have that access knowledge. Average Africans don't have it. You see, if you have that knowledge, you are a lucky person. You happen to live in a Western country or a rich world country. If you're a black person who lives in, if you're a poor black person who living in South Africa or Namibia, you have no knowledge of a black person, of the status of a black person in Nigeria. You have no knowledge of a poor black person in Ghana. Even if you live in Angola, you have no knowledge of a poor black person living in Kenya. If you live in Kenya, you have no knowledge of a poor black person in Tanzania, your neighboring country, or even Mozambique or Madagascar. A lot of black people don't have it in Africa. They don't have the knowledge and the access of information of the status, majority of them. And like I said before, but a lot of Caucasian people, they know that. This is why they can move from one country, mess up this country, they go to the next, because they're well aware the next people have no knowledge of what happened to this country. You understand what I'm saying? They can, if they mess things up in Ghana, they can go take a plane or a bus that in Namibia, and the person in Namibia is going to greet them and welcome them, even if they mess up in the neighboring country. They are well aware these people are not connected. You understand? They are well aware of that. They know that people in Africa are not connected. They are way from being connected, far away from being connected. Not only that, geographically they're not connected. Language-wise, there are thousands of tribes in Africa. They're not even connected. You understand? The knowledge is not even. A lot of African countries have got different school, different educational systems, different. Pretty much one country is on its own. You understand? Which prevents even dialogue between two countries. If you are a French-speaking country, you have no idea of an English-speaking country. Later on, tribes, different languages, and all this knowledge is not. You see, these are things which you can see in Africa, like I said, which led to the colonization of Africa. A lot of African countries are geographically ordinary people don't have access to information, particularly the most important. A lot of African countries do not have the access of knowledge. They do not know the status of black people outside Africa. They do not know the existence of other black people outside Africa. Majority is particularly ordinary people. So do not have an assumption that an average African knows this already. No, they don't. You see, they don't. Majority of, out of 90% of African people you see today in Africa have never landed a foot in America. They don't know whether America is an island or America is bigger than Nigeria. They have no clue of that. I've been in America, but I'm well aware that the bulk of people in Africa do not have the knowledge. Now, if they do not know the America and they've never been in America, do you really think they know the status of black people living in America? 98% of black people, 99% of black people in Africa have never set foot in Brazil. Do you think they know the status of black people in Brazil? 98% of black people have never put foot in the Caribbean. Do you think they know the status of black people in the Caribbean? 98.8% of black people have never set foot in Australia, in Fiji, in the Pacific Islands. Do you really think they have got access? Do you really think they've got access to knowledge or to know the status of majority of black people in those countries? The answer is no. If they don't know, the existence of black people outside Africa? Do you really think they know the condition? Majority of Africans, they have no idea. Same thing applies. You see what I'm saying? If someone doesn't know the condition, if someone doesn't know the existence of people outside, do you think they can know the status? They don't know even the existence of people outside Africa. You see, a lot of Africans, I would say 99% of Africans, the average poor African, they don't know of the existence of black people, the Aborigines, Fijians, or black people who live in the Pacific. Majority of Africans, they have no idea. So if any shit happens to black people in those countries, do you really think they know anything? If you are a thinker, do you really think they've got a clue of what happens there? They don't. But guess what? That knowledge, a lot of Caucasian people have got that knowledge already. They've got that knowledge. They've got the view. They've got the world view. And it is the world view of knowing which they use. Not necessarily that they like Africans. No, they're well aware that this type of people, they don't know. You understand? They can mess up a black man in America, or they can mess around with the black people in America and fly to black people in Australia. A black person in Australia is going to greet them with a lovely smile and things. Why? He has no idea of what's happening in America. They can do the same thing. Go to Fiji. They can mess up with a black person in America and fly to Kenya and be greeted because they're well aware of the view of the world. They're well aware of the world as a globe, of the completely globe, and they know the status of people. A lot of black people don't know. Think of a black person who lives in America, a black person who lives in Chicago. Do you think black people who live in Chicago know the status of a black man who living in the rural side of Tanzania or Kenya? No, you don't. A black person who lives in Chicago has no clue about the status of a black person who lives in Mozambique or Madagascar. You don't have that knowledge. But a lot of white people have got they've got the knowledge and the status of the globe. You understand? That's why they can maneuver. That's why even the so-called divide and conquer is done. It can be centrally done from afar. You know what I'm saying? Because they know where they're going. You understand? They know they're almost pressing the dot. I can go there. I can go there. I can go there. This is why even any racist person from America can fly to Africa for a holiday and be greeted in Africa. They can be greeted with Africans, and a lot of black people in America get surprised, like, oh my God, how can a racist person in America fly to Africa and be greeted with the Africans like he's this and this? You have no idea that majority of black people in Africa do not have access to knowledge of what's happening in America, let alone the globe, and let alone the status. The most important thing you need to understand is that 90% of black people in Africa, 90%, 95% I would say, of black people in Africa have no idea of the status and the conditions of black people in the diaspora or internationally. They don't know where they are. They don't know their situations. They don't know their conditions. They don't know their plight. You understand? They don't even know what are these black people. Why do they live where they live? What happens? A lot of Africans, I'm telling you, 98% have no knowledge of that. That is why a lot of things which is happening globally, especially to black people, happens like that, because a lot of things needs to be done from the top, especially in Africa. A lot of things needs to be done, and there should be a lot of sort of like an information center where anything happens there, the knowledge is passed from Africa. Something must be done under that in Africa, something which gathers information, like a media center where information happens globally and then it's sent quickly, you understand, to the African community. Other than that, a lot of people, particularly poor, they don't. This is the situation. They don't. People you see in Africa, they do not have the assumption that they know. Just like slavery, a lot of Africans are not aware of slavery. Even black people in America, you need one thing to understand. Don't assume that Africans know anything about slavery. Majority of Africans you see today never witnessed a slavery. They have no idea. The only thing they know is what they were told. They didn't exist. Just like in America, a lot of black people you see in America didn't suffer slavery. Those who suffer slavery died, but you are descendants of slavery. But in Africa also, you see today West African people, the knowledge of what happened during slavery was never passed on from Africa to Africa, and Africa was divided long time ago. Before even the knowledge of the existence of slavery was known in Africa, it was never known. If you go to South Africa and talk about slavery, they ask you, what are you talking about? But it never took place in their country. You understand? So when you are a black person in America coming to Africa, a lot of black American people, they treat Africa as one country. Africa is not one country. It's 54 countries with nearly 4,000 tribes and languages. Each African, Nigeria has got 160 languages. 160 languages. One country. And if an average black person, they speaks only 2 or 3. They have not even a connection to other tribe through the language. Africa is not like America in which everybody shares English. No. There's a lot of barriers to Africa, to the knowledge movement in Africa. You understand? This is also the contributory effect of slavery. A lot of African countries were divided a long time ago, and the knowledge was pretty much, there's a lot of barrier. So this is what I wanted to say to the brother that's saying, oh, a lot of, white people love Africans, but they can't stand black Americans. No. They understand that Africans are not aware of the status of black people globally. They're not aware of the conditions. They're not aware of the status of black people. They're not aware of the circumstances of the black people globally. You understand? A black person who's born in Brazil today, majority of black people who you see who are born in Brazil, they have no knowledge of Africans. Majority of them. And it's vice versa. So who's going to cry for whose plight? Unless a situation is created in which knowledge is shared, institutions are shared, countries open their borders sort of like a knowledge center and allow a free sort of like movement of black people in the diaspora internationally to come in and out freely in Africa. So that, unless certain measures are taken, do not assume that a black person in Africa somehow knows. A black person can be roughed in America there. A black person in South Africa or Namibia or Kenya or Botswana, they have no idea of that. They know nothing of that. You understand? They have no clue. This is why a lot of Africans, you see the way they behave. And another thing, this is why you see a lot of Africans behave the way they do towards Europeans. They act like they lovey-dovey because they have no knowledge of the status of things like racism, police brutality, which is happening globally. Majority of Africans know nothing. They've no clue. Pretty much when they're looking at a European person, they think, oh, they're looking at someone who's coming to save them, because they've never lived in Europe. They've never lived with these people like what black Americans are. A lot of black Americans, you went through hell because you lived in the belly of the beast, living in America. A lot of Africans never lived with white people. They've never, I'll tell you straight out, a lot of black people have never, in Africa, almost 98% of Africans have never lived with white people. They don't know. So if you talk about anything called racism, anything like racism and things of police brutality, things of that nature, most Africans you see today are not aware of things like that. Are not aware, except their grandmothers. Long time ago, died long time ago. Majority of Africans you see today have no knowledge of that. That's why you see them behaving the way they do, especially when they're seeing white people. It's the lack of knowledge. They've never lived with them. They've never went through the police brutality and things. They know nothing. Only thing is that they lived among themselves. When they're going to Europe or in America, they think they're making a deliberate action of going there to get certain things, or maybe I'm going for a green pastures, finding a job or working there, or better living or things like that. That's their idea. They're not aware of the living circumstances of black people in those countries. You understand? That's why the behavior of a lot of African, not only African people, average African people, I'm talking including leaders, including in African leaders. So do not assume African leaders. One of the things which need to be created is a situation in which we create a situation in which African people in the diaspora, particularly in America or in the diaspora, to create a situation in which they come to Africa and join in situations like African Union or in places which African leaders gather, so that at least black people in the diaspora, voice their view to say, why can't this happen? Why can't this happen? Other than that happening, a lot of black people in Africa do not know nothing. They do not know anything. So do not assume that they do. A lot of black people in America, they say, oh, the Chinese are coming. These people are coming to Africa. The Europeans are coming to this. Everybody is coming to Africa. A lot of African people, they're not aware of the global. They don't know anything about global politics, geopolitics, and all these other things you see today. They know nothing about that. So don't assume they do. An average African is thinking these people are coming to help me build a railway or these things. They're not aware of that. They're dealing with, but people from outside, they're well aware that these Africans are not aware they're being dealt with from afar. You understand? But internally, a lot of African people are not aware of the geography or global economics, global things, which globe. They don't know about that. And that is the knowledge which is needed. You see, just like a black man in America, anything which happened in America, you automatically know it already. And if people know things like that in Africa from a global, it will be easy to talk with them. Why is that happening there? They will be easy to have platforms of communication and sharing information. But a lot of African people, sadly, they don't have that knowledge. They don't. And say only Europeans have that. That's why they can move. Even a person who's racist in America or Europe anyway, they can go to Africa, any place in Africa. They can go anywhere and be greeted, be worshipped there. Because the ordinary people you see in Africa, don't assume that they know anything. They do not know zero. You understand? They're completely blank. They do not know. They're thinking, oh, these people are coming to visit us. Oh, these people are coming to see lions. And meanwhile, a person in America is like, no, this person is not coming to see lions. This person is the most racist person who just left America 2 days ago. But in Africa, they're greeted. Why? Because a lot of people in Africa don't assume they know. Do not have this idea that Africans are well aware of things which is happening globally. They don't. This is why even slavery came to Africa. Many people had no idea in Africa that Africa was taken over and colonized simply because it had black people. But a lot of black people had no idea. People coming from outside, they thought they were friends. These people are coming to see us. Oh, let's share the information. And where is the diamonds over there? Where is the gold over there? And they were sharing this with people who now they realize they were enemies. It's the lack of knowing of things globally. That lack of information of knowing globally, that is what has contributed to black people to see today. That is why you see the status of black people you see today. You understand? It's the knowledge absent. Nobody gives the information. Nobody says over there something is happening. There is nothing like that. So don't assume. And sadly, a lot of Europeans know that. They know very well that a lot of black people, they don't know about the global things. They don't even know the status of their own people globally. Later on, a person in America could be, let's say a black person is being chopped in America and is dead. 90% of Africans, 99% of Africans, they have no clue of that. They won't have any clue. So what happens in America is that it is only around in America. Black people in America are the ones with access to that. The rest of black people know nothing. Do you think they'll react the same? They don't. This is why you see Africans are like that. And sadly, a lot of Europeans are well aware that Africans don't know. Majority of them, this thing is far-fetched for them. They're too poor. Everybody's minding their own business, trying to make a living. They don't know about the global things. And that is the global, situation is what they need to know. See, when you know the status of, if you are a black person in America, you know the status of black people in America. Then you get the knowledge of knowing the status of black people in the Caribbean, the status of black people in the, in Brazil. But vice versa, it should be the same vice versa. I've seen sometimes black people darker black people being abused in Barbados. The Haitians, black people who are mixed. Black people who are mixed, they were abusing black people who were not mixed. My skin color. In Haiti, why? Because a black person in Barbados, those who were mixed, they believed that they were better because most of their forefathers were a Caucasian person in their family, and so they were more lighter. And because of that, they were encouraged by to exercise that I'm better simply because I'm mixed. And they had no idea that if they leave their country, Barbados, and go to America, they'll be treated like a nigger, like anybody else. They had no idea. So this is the status this is the status of black people. You see black people in Haiti, are abused by black people who live in Barbados, because those in Barbados are mixed and they think they're better. They think, oh, since they're mixed and they've got a lot of European blood and so they're light skinned, so they think they're better. And most of the time, they've been used, in fact, to abuse their darker counterparts. Throughout the years, from the 1850s onwards, they've been acting like that. The closer you are to Europe, the better you think you are. Majority of them were like that. And they grew up believing this kind of thing until they go to America. When they go to America, they realize, oh my God, whether you're mixed or you're dark skinned, you're both niggers, you'll be treated the same. America is what shocked them. But when they're outside in their country, they hang on to that mixed thing, that I'm better, I'm this and this, I'm better. A lot of mixed people globally, they were encouraged to think that they're better simply throughout, the so-called field nigger, which is a darker skin, and the house nigger. So the house nigger believed that since slavery, they believed that. They would even taunt the their darker looking mothers back then, believing in that. And this is the status, but like I say, they don't know about how they will be treated. Just like a mixed person in Barbados who abuses a Haitian or darker looking Haitians. If they go to Europe, they realize, oh, I'm a nigger, just the same way like the darker counterparts. But because of the lack of knowledge of your status globally, like I say, due to the lack of knowledge of black people, the lack of black people knowing the status they are in globally, is why black people act dysfunctionally, they act the way they do, because they don't know what is happening over there. They don't know what is happening over there. They don't know the status of black people over there. If they knew, understand, just like a black person who's light-skinned think is Arab in North Africa, and light-skinned black person in North Africa thinks he's Arabic. And then when they go to Middle East, they're abused and they realize, they're treated as niggers, like, that the niggers of the Arab world, then they're chased there in the Middle East, then they go back to Africa. But because they were bred and that is so-called sort of like white supremacy mentality was put in their mindset long time ago. So they think they're better than the darker Africans. And they've been thinking that way. This is why a lot of mixed black Arabs in the north, they think they're Arab. And they've been oppressing their darker counterparts. But because they don't know the status of black people global, if they go to the Middle East, whether you are black mixed or whatever, in there you're just a nigger if you are black, if you are mixed with black people, if you're mixed with black African DNA. But because, like I say, because of the lack of knowledge, a lot of black people, they don't know anything about the status of black people globally. So the answer I've mentioned here, this is what I wanted to say to the brother who was saying, Uhuru, saying, white people love Africans, but white people love Africans and can't stand African Americans. That's not true. Like, I've given you the answer on why I said that's not true. They just understand that black people from Africa won't behave the same way because they don't have the same histories and they are not aware of the status of what is happening to black people on a global scale. So globally, you understand, it is the lack of black people's awareness of black people's status globally, which is what a lot of Europeans or white people in America are well aware of, or in Europe. You understand, it's the knowledge of that these Africans, they don't know. That's why when you see a black person in Africa coming to America, they're all lovey-dovey of white people because they don't know the status of black people in America. You understand? It's only when they know the status of black people global, what happened to black people global, that's when they start coming in there. That's where the knowledge start realizing, something's wrong here. But until that happens, they don't know. So don't say, white people prefer Africans than African Americans. No, that's not true. They pretend because they know that Africans are not aware of the status of black people globally, and that is the answer. The reasons I've given you, that is the answer. And for that, you can subscribe or say anything. Anybody who wants to communicate, you can leave a comment. And if you want us to go through any other exchange of knowledge, that would be true for me. And in that said, God bless America and everybody else. And goodbye. See you the other day. Bye.